Alright, so in this video, we're going to be testing the blunderbuss damage versus the target dummies in the recent update. If a lot of you probably don't realize, the target dummies can actually be killed in the recent update. They just have a ton of regeneration. So without further ado, let's get into the tests. I tested, first off, two builds, the Nestshot build and the Clawshot build. And there was something surprising that I found out, and it's that Nestshot actually performed better than Clawshot. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so before I get to the blunderbuss, I wanted to first test this with Rapier, because in my previous video, I tested the Rapier versus the blunderbuss, so I thought it would only be fair to kind of do a similar test here. I'm not going to do it to the same in-depth way that I did it in my previous video, but it should be well done enough where I think there shouldn't be much of a question. So in this test, we're running Evade Rapier, 25 strength, 350 dex, 300 int, 25 focus, 25 con. And we're running, obviously, the correct Rapier setup with the bleed application. We're also running Keen Tondo on our Rapier, as well as Disdained. I can't remember the third perk, but it's, I think it's a fresh move, with Inferno, obviously. So it is a fully bissed out Rapier setup, the best of the best. And yeah, it took us about 3 minutes and 34 seconds. And when we get to the blunderbuss test, you'll see how significant of a difference this really is. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like I didn't really make any mistakes with our rotation in this test. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to go on for another 2 minutes here, and I don't really have much else to say. One thing is that a lot of people seem to be attached to the Rapier in a way that I don't quite understand, because I've used the Evade Rapier before it was meta, okay? I've been using this weapon for a very long time, and I remember back in the day, everyone would say, you should not use Evade Rapier, you should be using Bleed Rapier. So nowadays it's kind of become where Evade Rapier is like the meta. Bleed Rapier is still obviously meta, quote unquote, but it didn't used to be the case where Evade Rapier was meta. It used to be kind of like, you should never use Evade Rapier, you should never use your post, and all of this stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see this shift, and I feel like I've done a pretty decent job showing that the blunderbuss is meta. I don't know. I mean, it's weird to see the backlash that I've got on my first two videos regarding the blunderbuss. I don't know what it comes down to, because the blunderbuss is a very strong weapon, and it's very clearly outperforming the Rapier. Anyone who bothers to put in the time and effort to test this for themselves will see the same result. So it still confuses me why that's happening. I don't know. Maybe they're attached to the Rapier too much. Maybe, you know, I really don't know. But yeah, this was the Rapier tests that we did. Like I said, it took us 3 minutes, 30 seconds roughly. And we'll get into the blunderbuss tests now. Okay, so the first build that I tested was Clawshot with obviously shrapnel blast and splitting grenades. I was also using everything in my kit, so that comes down to our fire staff, our heart rune, and anything else that would involve this test. I was not using any honing stones apart from a attribute buff, which I used for every test, so it should be pretty reliable here. Just getting that extra attributes, but other than that, I was not using any other buffs that should affect this. On the hotbar, sorry, you can see that I was using Angry Earth, but that's just from running a hive earlier, so that won't affect this test. But after these wear off, they won't be there anymore. Okay, so this test took me 2 minutes. It took us 2 minutes to kill this, and honestly, I was kind of surprised because after testing this with Nestshot, I was actually able to kill it quicker. It took a little less than 2 minutes, but not by a huge margin. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit surprising to see that, and I'm pretty on the fence still whether or not Nestshot is better. I think ultimately it probably is, just because this test pretty much shows that. But I think Clawshot still offers a lot of viability, especially when it comes to running multiple blunderbusses in the same build. So maybe you have one person running Nestshot and one person running Clawshot, and maybe a third person running 1-point Nestshot, because you can stack those bleeds. And that way, you just get a more diverse damage group. So anyways, this is about it for the first test. And we'll get on to the second test, which is the same, but I just ran it twice to get a better representation. All right, so on to our next test. We're going to be doing pretty much the exact same thing, just the Clawshot build with Fire Staff Inferno. And yeah, I mean, I think that this should pretty much show objectively that the blunderbuss is not only really strong on damage, but also outperforms every single weapon in the game. And I'd even put that up to a bounty. If anyone can show any other weapon that can kill the dummy faster than this, I'd be very curious to see it. Even Bleed Rapier, I'd be very curious to see. So I haven't tested with anything else apart from the test that I ran in this video, which was 1 test of Evade Rapier and 4 tests of the blunderbuss build, 2 being Clawshot, 2 being Nestshot, which I will get into after this. But I was very surprised by Nestshot because I've been using, Clawshot for a very long time, so it was pretty surprising to see the Nestshot being as good as it was. But yeah, other than that, I think that this should show the pretty big discrepancy between blunderbuss and Rapier. In my previous video, of course, I got a lot of backlash for saying blunderbuss was better. A lot of people tried to say it was empower related. People were saying, oh, your build is not set up correctly. You guys have to remember, I literally remade the video with top of the line gear. I crafted gear. I spent over 200k making just a perfect setup so that I could prove that wrong. So hopefully this covers all the bases. And I love the Rapier, so that's also another thing to mention. But anyways, let's get on to the next test. Okay, so in this test, we're going to be using the Nestshot build instead of Clawshot. And I've been using Clawshot for pretty much as long as I've been using the blunderbuss, so it was a bit of a change of pace for me to get used to this. So my rotation was probably not the best, but regardless, it actually performed better than my Clawshot build. So definitely surprising there. And the reason I wanted to test this is because I had a comment in one of my videos that mentioned Nestshot being a viable option. And also, I have a friend who plays on Eldorado, if anyone plays on that server. I'm sure you've heard of Sandwich Slayer. Probably one of the best PvE players on the server. He is kind of like the pioneer of the blunderbuss. He's the one who got me into the blunderbuss to begin with, and he uses Nestshot as well. So ultimately, I think that Nestshot is probably better objectively in terms of damage if you can perfect your rotation. But yeah, it took us, I think, about a minute 57 to kill it. And comparing that to the Clawshot taking about 2 minutes 10 seconds on average, it's a pretty significant difference. You'll see in our next test we actually run this again and we get a pretty big discrepancy, and I'll talk more about that when we get to it. But yeah, I think that both builds are viable, and Nestshot ultimately is going to be better overall, but in a group it might be different. And yeah, that'll just come down to cycling that damage between players. Okay, so as is tradition, we're going to be running this test again, the same setup, Nestshot, blunderbuss build. But surprisingly with this test, we actually performed a lot worse than our first test with the Nestshot. So the first test took us about a minute 57. This test took us about 2 minutes and 13 seconds. So it's a difference of over 10 seconds, which in my eyes is pretty significant, especially when it comes to a test like this, where it's realistically all about as quick as possible to kill things. Now, it could be the case that our rotation was worse than the first one, which realistically I think that's the best explanation. So yeah, I think that ultimately both the Nestshot build and the Clawshot build are very strong. And if you're perfect on your rotation, I think that Nestshot is probably slightly better. But that also implies that no one else is running Nestshot. So this is why I think that the best meta setup for a 10-man or 20-man setup would be a Nestshot player, and either a Nestshot 1-point player or a Clawshot player. And this will diversify your damage a little bit more, so not so everyone's not stacking the damage onto each other and you're just not getting as much benefit. So yeah, I think that these tests should be pretty reliable when it comes to figuring out which build you want to go for. But like I said, you know, both builds are strong, and if you like the maneuverability of Clawshot, which I prefer, then go with that, because realistically you're not missing out on too much versus Nestshot. So yeah, apart from that, I would say that Nestshot is probably just objectively going to be slightly better, but only by a small margin. So yeah, I think that about covers it for the test here, and let's end with my closing thoughts. So I feel like I shouldn't need to say this, but based on the backlash that I received on my previous videos regarding the blunderbuss, it might be worth saying, and the truth is, test this for yourself. At the end of the day, if you don't want to be convinced, you're not going to be. So the only way that you're going to figure things out for yourself is if you actually test it yourself. And I can only show you so much. You know, I can go through every single variation possible when it comes to testing this, but that'll just take way too long, be pretty pointless at the end of the day, because all you really need to do is just run this test for yourself. Make a blunderbuss build, make a rapier build, and test it. The funny thing is, my blunderbuss build is actually not even close to being this. I have gear that, I mean, that's my rapier build, but if we go to our blunderbuss build, we have 5 out of 4 refreshing. A lot of this gear is hoplite gear with not the greatest setup. We don't have full fire harnessing, so it's not a perfect setup. And that's what I'm trying to say here. If you are biased by any means, because there's a lot of Rapier players who are, in my opinion, quite biased. They think that the Rapier is the best, and they're not willing to accept anything else. Just try it yourself. Just test it yourself. I think this video should show pretty good when it comes to the discrepancy, because it's pretty significant when you actually look at the numbers here. But yeah, I mean, I can only say so much in this video, so at the end of the day, just try it yourself. Anyways, guys, I think I've rambled enough. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.